It's strange how Eraserhead is. It is a personal film. It's my first feature, and it took the longest of any film, and I lived and loved that world. I can't remember when I got the idea, when the word Eraserhead or any part of the idea came to me first. I can't remember whether it was in Philadelphia or when I first came to California. Completely don't remember. Don't remember writing the script, and I don't remember the ideas coming in, especially the initial idea. A lot of times I remember when the first thing kind of came. Maybe I don't, but for sure I don't remember this. It all came from Philadelphia, but I don't know when it bobbled up to the surface. I got a independent filmmakers grant in 1968. That's an independent filmmakers grant. That was a brand new program, and I was in the second group to get one of those grants. That was to make The Grandmother. That's when I met Alan Splett and Herb Cardwell, who was a cinematographer. And I asked him, give me some tips on lighting. Then when we came time to mix, and I look over and I see this guy, he's like a beanpole in a shiny black suit, 15, 20-year-old suit. And I shake his hand and I can feel the bones rattle in his arm. That was Al. And this guy was as straight as an arrow. And I figured this is never going to happen, not in a million years. And what followed was 63 nonstop days, Saturday, Sunday, of making sounds. And never had so much fun in my life working with Al. But I need extra money to finish the film. So I called Tony Villani in Washington, D.C., where the AFI's headquarters were then. Tony, bless his heart, came all the way up on the train. And I met him at the station, and he came over, and I showed him the film at Calvin Dufresne. And he, really liked what he saw. They gave me $2,200 more to finish the film. And on the way back to the train station, I'm driving him, and he said, David, you should come to the Center for Advanced Film Studies out in California. And luckily, I didn't have an accident, when he said that, because I was like, I started floating. And I was still trying to reach the, the brake and the gas pedal. But they made a booklet showing the center and some of the fellows. Instead of students, they call them fellows. And they took 15 fellows a year. So now they sent this booklet out, and I'm getting this booklet, and on the front cover is this 55-room mansion on 18 acres of land in the middle of Beverly Hills. So you kind of, say, this is, what kind of a fantastic world do we live in, when they got a school like this? And then they open it up, and it goes through all these great directors that came and give talks there, and how much, the industry was helping the school, and different programs, different seminars. And one of the seminars they showed the students sitting in this room with beautiful wood paneling and a fire in the fireplace, giant like Hearst-like fireplace. And some of the students are wearing sweaters. And I'm thinking, what kind of a place is California? Because it's not just, hot all the time. It's sometimes cool enough in the evenings for a fire in the fireplace and wear a sweater. This seemed like the perfect, thing. The Center for Advanced Film Studies started in 1969. I went out in the summer of 1970. Al was placed as head of the sound department. So Al went out actually a month before I did, and he took a little apartment on San Vicente, right down the street from the Whiskey A Go-Go. And then Jack Fisk and my brother John and I drove out in a truck and rolled into town after 3 days on the road at night. And I'm still not getting the feel of LA, but I get a little feel of a nighttime LA. When I woke up the next morning, it was like I was almost blinded. The light was so unbelievable. And I couldn't get over it, how bright it was. I had to stand out in the front of the house getting blinded by this light. And it felt so good. It was unbelievable. Then we walked up to the AFI, it was actually Doheny, the senior's son, that was built for him. And was built in 1929, finished in 29. And it was 55 rooms, reinforced concrete, high on a hill. The real deal. When you go into this place, it's spectacular. And so we all went up there and kind of walked around with their, jaws falling open. And that started, the next sort of phase. I worked on a script called Gardenback, and Frank Danielle and Gil Dennis both sort of took me under their wings. Frank Danielle is the greatest film teacher in the history of the world, and he's since died, bless his heart. But he was unbelievable as a great teacher. And I took a film analysis class with him, and then he and Gil, who was a fellow there, but he was sort of working with Frank, and they would have script meetings with me, but it didn't work out. I was completely fed up. It was going nowhere. It was getting longer, but all my good bits that I liked were, just being filled up in between with stuff I didn't have a clue why it was there. And so the first day of the second year, so now it's 1971. For some reason, I got put into first year classes. And I thought that it was that I might have flunked, my first year. And plus, I was fed up with Gardenback. So I went up to Frank Danielle's office, and I quit. I quit the school and stormed out and went down. I told Al I quit, and he said, I quit as well. So we both went out and went down to the Hamburger Hamlet and had some coffee. And when I got back home, Peggy, my wife at the time, said, what happened? They've been calling you. And so I explained to her, and she said, Frank said, you got to come back. You got to come up and talk. And so eventually I went back up and had a really good talk with Frank. And Frank said, if you're upset, we're doing something wrong. What do you want to do? And I said, I want to make Eraserhead. He said, okay, you'll make Eraserhead. And he said, it's a 21-page script, so it's a 21-minute film. I said, no, I think it's a hair longer than that. And he said, okay, it's a 42-minute film. I said, okay, and off I went. And that was the beginning of it. Somehow, I had a script of Eraserhead by 1971. There wasn't really a script. it was a 22-page thing, and I don't know what people really got from that script. I know that Frank Danielle, who was the dean of the school, he died maybe 5 years ago. And at his funeral, his son told me that Frank himself didn't really like Eraserhead, but he didn't, the script, and maybe the film too, I don't know. But he said that it was important that I be able to do it. And a man was on the board of directors at AFI. This is what his son, Frank's son, told me, and told Frank, this is not the kind of film that we make here at the American Film Institute. And Frank said, this is exactly the kind of film, we should be making here at the American Film Institute. So it got strange, and as it turns out, I never knew about this till 5 years ago. Frank turned in his resignation, thinking it would not be accepted, and they accepted his resignation from his son's story because of Eraserhead. And Frank left the AFI. Certain things had to be done before shooting commenced. And so I started working on those things. And somewhere in there, even I'd sort of been going down to the stables toward the end of the first year. I call them the stables. There were stalls, there were garages, there were car garages, all equipped with hydraulic lifts for the old, cars. There were maids' quarters. There was a huge hayloft, and there was a place where they stored firewood, which was, kind of enormous too. And there was also a greenhouse and gardener's quarters. And I took a room down there, and no one ever went down there. So I just sort of started, doing some things down there. And then I got the whole stables to work in, and a garage and some stalls and a hayloft and some other surrounding areas. It was like a mini soundstage. So, and then I got all this equipment from AFI. It was like heaven. We had 2 cameras, 2 CM3s, Eclair CM3s. We had a whole lighting package. We had video cameras, black and white, video cameras. We had a room that was called the camera room, where all the different camera things were stored, lenses and everything. We had a room that was we called the food room, where we ate. We had green rooms where Jack would put on his makeup. But strangely, on Eraserhead, the first person I met was in the film. I'm pretty sure I never saw more than one actor before the thing was cast. Yeah, mostly friends would tell me about someone, or someone else would tell me about someone, and this person would come in, bango, this was, like perfect. I said, you're perfect. It was weird. I felt bad about it because I said, I'm not, seeing enough people. And, but they just come in, and they just had it was like fate was just dropping them on the doorstep. The most important actor was Henry Spencer. There was a guy at AFI named David Lindemann, who was a theater director in San Francisco before he came down to AFI as a student. And he knew lots of actors. So one day, I, I described the character I was looking for as best I could. And he said, there are two people that I would recommend. One of them, his name was Jack Nance. So I said, okay. And I made this arrangement to meet Jack. And Jeannie Bates was the only one I had doubts about because she was so beautiful. When she walked in, she looked, way too beautiful. And I told her, I said, you gotta, understand, you're too beautiful. And, but she had a fixation. It was weird. And she said she would work very hard, to get, into that and look that way. And I built her a drooping eye and a wart and some facial hair. And she did the rest. And she just did a beautiful job. Charlotte Stewart was a friend of Doreen's who was signed on as production manager. And Charlotte was in Little House on the Prairie in those days. And many times she'd come in with all this, TV makeup on, and we'd have to get all that stuff off, and then frump her up, and then she'd be ready to go. Alan Joseph played Bill X, and he was also the first person cast for that role, and first person I saw, and it made a great family. In the those early Polaroids, you can see a family picture of the three of them, and it's a good-looking family. It was a great group, all the people. Everybody was great to work with. Everybody, got there, and the rest of the world disappeared, and we were in a space that everyone seemed to understand. The crew was Doreen Small, Catherine Coulson, Herb Cardwell, me, and Jack. And that was the crew for most of the picture. Herb Cardwell was the first DP. Herb worked for 9 months. Herb is a great DP. And Herb died when he was 35 years old. He died in his sleep. That was long after he finished, working on Eraserhead. One day, Herb took me and Peggy flying, and he said, there's a beautiful airport north of here in the desert. And we flew up there, beautiful day. Landed just like the most perfect smooth landing. Herb is the only guy I know, he's the best driver in the world. Herb drove with both feet, and he would feather his stops and feather his starts, and he would accelerate at exactly the right moment in a turn. You never feel any tension. You are very relaxed. Everything is smooth, and you're not rocking to and fro or side to side. But anyway, it's beautiful. Herb's driving, and the same way he flies, so smooth, perfect. And we went out, and after we'd landed in the desert, and kind of walked around in the desert, and then flew back. And when we landed in L.A., it was night, and we were taxiing to the place where he was going to, stop his plane, and he radioed to the tower, and the sound of his voice and the character of his voice. All the hair went up on my back of my neck, and I got goosebumps all over. And it occurred to me that Herb, in another life, was a long-distance space pilot. The way he said goodnight to the the tower, it was like he would have been flying for millions of years. It was the weirdest thing. The guy was a pilot, and it was very beautiful the way he said goodnight to the tower. It was incredible. And when Herb had to leave because he couldn't afford to stay anymore, Tony Villani told me about Fred, and he came to AFI as a cinematography student. Fred and I met, and Fred had a very good attitude, and talked with Herb, and it felt like the right thing. And then this transition, brought Fred into the mix. And then Fred Elms took over, and Herb brought Fred up to speed over a 2 or 3 or 4 week transition. And Fred then shot for 3 more years. One day, Jack Fisk and we found out that a studio was being shut down. It was kind of a cloudy day, and we went and rented a 35-foot flatbed and drove over to this place. And the clouds made it seem like there was a kind of a roof on the world. So when we went into the place, it was like, even though a lot of the place was open, it seemed like it was under a roof. And this was an ancient, real deal studio. And they were selling stuff for nothing. When we drove out of there, we had 35 feet long, 12 feet high of flats, bales of wire, kegs of nails, 30-foot by 40-foot black backdrop. I can't remember all the things we had. A lot of like radiators and things that I needed for the film, but all the sets were built with those flats. And since I had a paper route, if there were holes in them, I would just do paper mache, patches, and with the newspapers, Wall Street Journal and Flour and Water. And all that 35 feet by 12 foot high, all this stuff, $100. $100. My brother John helped me build sets. Like I said, Jack Fisk, helped, getting all these things. And they were stored down at the stables, all the flats, all the stuff. And then I had to, build, many things for sets. Nance helped me a lot, on certain building projects. And I loved working with Jack. We were troweling plaster one time, and it had a curved surface. So I talked to this guy about plastering. How do you trowel, get this stuff smooth like glass? He says, you got to trowel it. And so Jack and I just kept saying, you got to trowel it, all day long, troweling this thing. And finally got it pretty smooth. But it wasn't all day long. It was all month long. It was more like that. Jack at first wore the skin off his hands because he wasn't wearing gloves. And, plaster, a lot of plaster has sand in it. And so when you're rubbing stuff down with your bare hands, you don't realize it at first. But the skin sort of starts turning to jelly and rubs off. And you start seeing your bones. And their hands on fire, and it's really bright red. And Jack did this. Jack did a lot of crazy stuff. There were several props that I needed. And a deal was struck through AFI and Warner Brothers I just could drive on, and this was 1971. I met an old timer that had been at that studio for years and years and years, head of the prop department. Welcomes me, in we go. What do you want? Up one aisle, down the other. Unbelievable stuff. I'd say, could I, get this thing here? He says, put it out there on your truck, and I just went through, and about 4 years later, I returned those props, all different people, all different looking place. They had no record of it, nothing. Al was head of the sound department, so we had all the equipment that Al had at our disposal, and that included anagras and microphones and cabling and all that. And since there's not a lot of sync sound, dialogue in the film, but still, Al recorded all that. And the room, as every room is, it was a hair too live. And as everybody knows, you can add echo, but you can't take it away. So we built sound blankets. And the sound blankets were burlap around fiberglass and then grommeted along the edge. And so the grommets, you could hang them on nails at the top of the set walls, and then the sound blankets would drape down, and you could move them around real nice. They were light. And I think AFI wanted to, them built, and theoretically they would keep them and use them. So we made a budget and put all the materials in there and found out how much they cost and all this kind of stuff. And Al, before his incarnation as a sound man, was an accountant in Philadelphia at breweries. So Al was a pretty much of an ace on an adding machine. He and the other accountants would go so fast they'd jam the machines. And Al was so rapid, he would jam the best machines. And so he wanted to go, after we finished this budget, next door to the AFI accounting department and tally these numbers up. So we went over there, and there was a girl at the desk, and Al said, could we borrow the adding machine? And she said, what do you want the adding machine for? I'll add those. He said, no, I'll add them up, but, could we just use it? And she said, give me the numbers, I'll add them up. And Al said, no, let me add them up. I've got them right here. And he kind of went around, and this girl's eyes went about like silver dollars. He had those things in a heartbeat. This machine, jumped to life, and the paper was spit out. And he popped it and borrowed her stapler and put it together, and we walked back across the hall. But he was super fast on machines. And unfortunately, Alan Splett and Herb Cardwell are both gone now. But Al is legally blind, and but Herb can hear and see. Al and Herb decided they were going to fly across the country, and Al was going to be the navigator, and he had all the maps and everything like that. But Al would be reading his maps, very close, and because he was so blind. And the first leg of the trip, they were going up to Pocatello, Idaho. So they took off, and Al navigated Herb up there, and they radioed ahead. They were going to land at night, and the guy said it's so late he's going back into town, but he'll leave a rental car there, and just come in, lock up. It was the good old days. So Herb did a perfect landing, at night. They parked the plane. There was the rental car. They did everything the guy wanted and started driving into town. And around Pocatello, Idaho, there's just these narrow little 2-lane roads and pitch black. So Al's riding shotgun, Herb's driving, because Al couldn't get a driver's license because of his blindness. And Al tells this story. As they're driving from this little airport into the city of Pocatello, Idaho, Herb is talking, and he's telling some story or something and talking fairly, rapidly. And the talking suddenly doesn't start, it starts not making sense to Al. But it's rapid nonsense. And Al notices that the lights are now illuminating the side of the road. And the car is starting to, go off the road. And Herb's voice is now going up in pitch. And he's talking just as fast, but his voice is rising. And he's in the shoulder of the road, and his voice is going up higher and higher in pitch, even though Al is screaming at Herb right next to him. Herb doesn't hear. He keeps talking, and his voice, it comes to a little squeak coming out of him. And finally, Al goes over and hits him or yells loud enough, and Herb comes out and comes back onto the road just in the nick of time. They continue the trip just fine. Of course, that's like Al got to keep a good, eye on Herb. He didn't have a good eye. There needed to be, certain things discovered. And I love organic phenomenon. And that has led me to various things. And it led me to one day calling a veterinarian. And I asked him if he had a dead cat. And he said, "No, sir, I don't." And I explained to him. He said, What do you want a dead cat for?" And I said, "I want to study this cat." And so something he at first pegged me for a total nutcake, and then something caught him, and he took my number. And lo and behold, 10 minutes later, this same guy, veterinarian, calls me and he says, "I have a cat." I can't believe it. I get off the phone. 2 minutes later, in it comes. Had to put it to sleep, and you can have this cat. And he asked me that it would never show up in the film. So, or be recognizable. So I had to set up in my basement there. And I drove down and got the cat in a cardboard box. And just before lunch, I put it into a jar filled with formaldehyde. And it went in like a slinky. It just laid down in the formaldehyde. And then I went upstairs and had lunch and came back down, and I went to get the cat out of the jar, and it had gotten rigor mortis. And this had a narrow top. It was like trying to pull a steel cat out of a glass jar. And so I finally got this thing out of there. And I had a whole setup on the workbench. My idea of an operating theater, and I went to work getting inside this cat. And when I opened up the inside, it was unbelievable. And it's if you've seen Fellini's Roma, there's the organs inside the cat were brilliant colors. And as soon as the air got to the organs, the color just started draining out right before your eyes. Just draining away before your eyes. Just like when they'd open up these, things under the city, and these ancient things were perfect, and the air starts getting to them, and they start fading. So, but studying this cat was kind of, important. There was no time put on it, but the school went 2 years. So theoretically, I would be finished with this film by the end of the second year. And by the end of the second year, I hadn't yet started shooting. So we started shooting in June of 72.
Hello?
Hey, Kath.
Hey, David.
Do you have some stories you want to talk about, Catherine?
I was, God, I got a lot of stories. I really remember well the very first night of shooting. I remember being up in that hayloft part.
Right.
And it was like we set up a whole little set, and then there was the room with the couch, and I remember keeping Jack's hair a photo ready,
Right. I remember when Jack had his first haircut, which was the afternoon of the first day of shooting. And I wanted it short on the sides, tall on top. Jack and Catherine had a friend who was a professional barber who drove out to the stables. He got his haircut in the hayloft, and in the hayloft held the ex's, interior. So in the afternoon, Jack got his hair cut, and I stayed there with the barber and Jack and said it's looking good, and the barber left. But I still had a big surprise ahead of me. I'm not sure if it was Catherine or Charlotte Stewart, Catherine Coulson or Charlotte Stewart, who combed his hair first. Eventually, Catherine's job was to comb Jack's hair. But Jack has, as luck would have it, a certain type of hair. And when you comb it up, it stays up. So it was long on top. And when Jack came in, it was a very big shock. And some people said, David, you can't do that. That's too strange. But it was so perfect in proportion to Jack's body. Henry, forget Jack. He was turning into Henry. It was so beautiful. And so it stayed. But even so, that first day, it's not quite as high as it eventually, got. There's little stages to the hair, but it was pretty high. But when we would drive Jack around as Henry, he would sit in the back, in the middle of the back seat, because people would, there was no strange hair in those days. I mean, there was hippie hair, but not hair like that. And he would draw a small crowd, and people would start coming around. And so we had to kind of keep him hidden as we went around.
That was kind of hard on him, because we'd go for long periods of time before we'd shoot again, and then I'd have to cut it all over again, because cutting his hair was really, I think it's what destroyed the marriage, ultimately. Because I had to keep teasing it, remember?
Jack had the most incredible hair.
He did. He used to wear all these different hats to try and kind of mush it up under his hat. And I remember my family never really knew him without that weird hair. That he would go to like family reunions, and you always see him with this, kind of odd flattened hair, because he didn't like to tease it and wear it up when he wasn't just on the film.
I know.
But I know I am really sorry that I didn't ask for that credit. That even though it was your design, that I wanted that Mr. Nance's hair thing.
And his suit came from Goodwill. And it was in those days, the Goodwill was like, you go into a place, you couldn't believe what you were seeing. It was so beautiful. And so we just walked in, and picked, all the parts for Henry's suit, shoes included. I'm pretty sure those were from Goodwill. The first scene we shot was a scene on the couch with Henry, Mary, and Mary's mother, Mrs. X. And we did all the X's stuff first, and then we did the X's, how they relate at Henry's apartment. But most of those things are gone. But there was a scene at the front door of Henry's apartment with Mr. and Mrs. X paying a visit. And that was, it kills me. That is part of the film that's been lost. Then Alan was, and Jeannie were finished. So they actually got finished almost like on a regular film, fairly soon and professionally. But then when we got into Henry's apartment, it just went into another, zone. And that's when we, bit off quite a chunk of time.
No. Hi, Fred. Hiya, Fred.
And we would work at night. So people would start showing up at about 4:35 in the afternoon. And eventually we would have some dinner and start going to work. But unfortunately, the pace was quite slow.
We'd set it up for hours and hours and light it and stuff. See, I think that time was really kind of a wonderful distortion because it wasn't really important how long something took. It was what was important is how it really looked and felt. And nobody was really pushing because after a while, they just sort of like forgot about us, right?
Exactly right, Kath.
We just got to keep going and keep going and keep going.
See, what I want to do is have mainly the look on Henry's face, God, it's just like so real. I feel like he's here. But anyway, the look on Henry's face just when he's getting ready to cut, the big cut. Well, you do a run through. Jack may be in his robe or something like this, and he's going to be in his suit. And you rehearse with no lighting. And then,
Good actor,
then his point of view of the scissors. Those are the ones point of view shots that are really important, okay? Those two are really important. Now the opening up we can do third person, and the cutting.
So it's really one shot then, Dora, at the very top of the list. Second shot is over here with the 28.
Right.
Henry.
Cutting.
Henry cuts. He gets halfway up, we stop, we move over here with the 90.
After Jack and I had rehearsed, on our own, then Jack goes away and Herb would start, lighting based on what he saw in the rehearsal. It was painstaking lighting. It was exact. It was beautiful what Herb was doing. And sometimes, 15 or 20 little inkies, floating around up in the ceiling. That's why I say Philadelphia is my greatest influence, because a lot of things started in Philadelphia, and there is a certain mood to some of these interiors, and they carry way more than what you see. A thing is indicated from these interiors. Something about the light and the molding and the proportions, a thing is indicated, and the mood outside. And it sort of seemed like to me that there were factories, industrial buildings and neighborhoods, dark and forlorn, tucked in somewhere, sort of like you can't get there from here. They're sort of lost in another kind of place. And this is what comes from Philadelphia. And this is the world of Eraserhead, where you can be in a room and feel the exterior and know what it is like, just from a mood. And that's the way it was in Philadelphia as well. I don't remember. I remember one sunny day, and that's about it.
But what?
Crazy. He's mad as he comes.
Unfair.
Jack was one of the all-time greats at hitting marks. Completely together. We'd work out the tiniest details, and first time, every time after that, he'd, get it, just right.
Dr. Desmond Cooley complex.
Well, this is a 90mm lens, and I have a big slate. Did you already put it on?
Well, the thing is that with a small crew working at night, and see, Catherine, I think she's the heroine of the thing, because she wasn't even supposed to be helping. But she ended up, she had a waitress job in the day and then would stay up all night. And she'd bring, grilled cheese and fries and different things sometimes home from the restaurant up to the, to AFI, to the stables. Or we had a hot plate, and she would cook things, for us. So she was really burning that candle. Catherine?
Yeah.
You had a job during the day, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I had a few of them. I mean, one of the jobs I had was when I was
a waitress?
Working at Barbecue Heaven.
And then you would bring
I worked at Barbecue Heaven at lunchtime so that I could sleep till like around 11 and go in, and then we would get you odd jobs at the restaurant, remember?
I don't remember that.
You fixed the roof for them.
I did?
One time, yeah, because they'd give you grilled cheese sandwiches and French fries.
Wow.
So you did like odd jobs. This was that restaurant in Beverly Hills on the corner.
Yeah, I remember you working there, but I don't remember.
Yeah, no, that was a way for you to get like free food. Getting takeout food was really expensive, so I started making dinner.
Right.
And then pretty soon we were making breakfast and lunch.
Right.
And we cooked it all on that little hot plate. Remember that?
I sure do, Catherine.
Yeah, and there was a lot of grilled cheese, and then for a long time there you were into egg salad, as I recall.
Uh-huh.
And that you like to eat the same thing every day, and a lot of us kind of got used to that.
But each person had kind of fixations on food. And Al ate these small yogurts, pure yogurt, out of plastic containers, though. And he would use a plastic spoon. And Jack Nance couldn't stand the way Al ate yogurt, especially when he got near the bottom, was trying to get the last little bit out, and that spoon scraping on that plastic. It was pretty funny. Didn't you start out holding the boom, Catherine?
Yeah, the first thing I did was hold the boom for Alan.
Right.
Then I learned how to be a camera assistant during that time. And I really am glad I learned how to do that. I can still tell what 3 feet 8 inches is,
That's fantastic, Catherine.
And when I first met you, I remember going in for my interview for the nurse. And I'm really kind of sorry we never shot that scene.
There was a scene, which was never even shot, of a nurse in a hospital basement where they went to get the baby. And Catherine was going to play that nurse, but she never got to play it.
Frankie being tied to a bed,
Right.
and we were trying to find somebody to do that scene. Do you remember that? So I was calling all my women friends and asking them if they would mind, if they'd like to be in this movie, and they'd be in this scene where they just would be tied to a bed, and this guy had like these kind of battery cables, and everybody said no. For some reason, I never really understood that.
They weren't good sports, Catherine.
I guess we were pretty good sports, though.
Yeah,
'Cause
you and
Frankie and I did it, right?
You and Frankie did it great.
Does that exist anymore?
I actually have that little scene, Catherine.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, a part of it anyway.
God, I'd love to see that someday.
Yeah.
Well, mostly what I remember, David, is I remember being there really long hours and really having fun figuring stuff out. I remember the night that you asked Doreen and me to fill this whole drawer full of pudding.
Right.
It had like a little thin layer of peas on top.
Right.
And we were trying to calculate the square or the cubic footage of the drawer based on what was in a package of vanilla pudding.
Right.
It was like you used 2 cups of cold milk, and we were trying to figure out how many of those little packages that we got from the Sunbeam Market, because that was the one that was open really late on Sunset.
I remember that Sunbeam Market. Peggy
Yeah.
used to go
And
there.
we go down there to the Sunbeam and buy, but we didn't have a whole lot of money either, right?
No, we didn't, Catherine.
So we tried really hard to make the vanilla pudding stretch. And we tried to make it with water instead of milk so that it would, be a little less expensive. And then you just coated it with this little layer of peas. And they were frozen peas, as I recall. We had to kind of cook them so they'd be plump enough because they couldn't be really shriveled.
Right.
So we after we finally we lined the drawer with plastic, and then we filled the whole thing with the pudding, and then you just laid this little layer of peas, and then the scene was just Henry. I haven't seen it for a while, but Henry just reached in and pulled it out, right?
Exactly. All the utensils were down inside that stuff.
Right. Well, I remember that I was really learning how to do follow focus, but it was like a macro lens, wasn't it?
Uh-huh.
And then I had to figure out how much distance there was kind of like between peas, as he reached his hand in. But I just had another memory when the new fellows were coming the following year.
Uh-huh.
And they were having this big fancy dinner up at the main house.
That was the bed scene.
Right, and we were filling those tanks, and it was really, really cold outside.
Yeah, Jack had a couple of lines about that.
But we were driving back up and down that long driveway with these big Sparklets bottles, trying to get the water warm enough.
Exactly.
You had just run hoses into the tanks, hadn't you?
Yeah.
And it was really cold, and they were in it like all night.
Exactly right.
And what did you use to make the milk? To make it look like a milk bath.
I believe we used milk.
I think we did.
I think so.
I think we used milk, and that was another reason why the warm water wasn't such a good idea, although it didn't really heat the tanks completely. We'd bring down these Sparklets bottles and pour a little bit of warm in. But you know how milk is when it gets warm?
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, it tastes okay, but I don't remember it smelling really great.
Uh-huh.
But I remember Judith and Jack being really, really good sports throughout
They were
it all.
fantastic. I think Jack kind of enjoyed being in there with Judith.
I think he might have. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I don't even remember that bothering me at all.
After 1 year, like I said, almost to the day, Fred had been shooting for 3 months. We ran out of money. AFI would give a certain amount of money to each film, and that was it. And we'd run out. So it just stopped. And, hope was in the air. But I think it was quite a long time before um, I got more money to continue. And two great supporters of the film were Jack Fisk and Sissy Spacek. And Jack, in those days, right around that time, after we'd been down for a while, um, Jack had two jobs as production, what they call an art director then. And since he had two jobs, uh, he would have me follow him to the bank, and he'd sign over one of those paychecks to me, so we could, keep working. And things like that. Both Jack and Sissy put money into the film. Also, Jack's sister, Mary Fisk, played a huge part near the end of Eraserhead by, raising all the finishing money. Then, from then on, it went piecemeal, with many months downtime trying to get money or build a set or, to go forward. And then we'd shoot for a burst and then, go down again. I know pretty clearly that there's one particular shot when Henry walks down the hall, he puts his hand on the doorknob and turns it, and there's a cut. A year and a half later, he comes through the door. I started living in the stables in 1972. To live and work in the same place is the best. So it was a perfect, scenario. I lived in the stables and had it, for all those years. And Al, a lot of the times lived in the one wing, and I lived in Henry's room, and I lived there maybe off and on 2 or 3 years. It was illegal what I was doing, and Henry's room was inside of a room that might have been a living room at one time for the maids. It had 2 doors. Both of the doors we went in and out of. One of the doors had a door on it, and you open it up, and it had another door that was a door in a hallway. So it was a 2-door deal. So when I slept, I bolted a piece of plywood over the doorway, the original doorway, from the inside, and they padlocked me in from the main door. So someone coming up would see a piece of plywood with just the rounded, ends of bolts, and no other, visible way to open it, and then they'd see a padlock on the main door. So I was secure in there, I felt, and then I'd hunker down and sleep in the day. And it was very dark in there. There was no windows. So it was a kind of a beautiful room to sleep in. They knew I was there, certain key people, but they kept it quiet and turned their head away. And Jim King, who was lived in the gatehouse with his wife. Jim knew very well I was staying down there, and he would give me a yearly inspection, and he would announce, "I'm here for your yearly inspection," and come through and look at all the rooms, because he had to do it. And and then give me a passing mark that we're keeping things okay, and off you go till I saw him the next year. One night, this was after Herb had gone, a big bin, like a big giant trash bin, not a low boy, but one of the things with the ladders on them. You got to go up a ladder to see inside. This had been delivered in a courtyard up at the main house. And Fred and I went up there, and no one was around. It was just sitting there. No one knew what was in it. And we discovered that inside there were like 10,000 light bulbs in ancient, wrappings from some studio that was getting rid of this stuff from ages ago. And we crawled in there and probably got, 200 or 300, maybe 500 inky bulbs. Fred got bulbs bigger than basketballs that he still has. There were, I don't know if they were 5,000 watt bulbs or more. I don't know what they were, but all different kind of ancient light bulbs. It was like beyond Christmas.
I have like all these images in my head, like going around and looking for alleys. I'm driving and driving and driving around, and then going ahead and bringing everything down in our cars.
Right.
And that we all just sort of did everything.
All the locations were, well, not all of them, but pretty nearly every one of them was downtown LA. But on the other side of the street from Cedars-Sinai Hospital, there was a whole block that used to exist, a huge block, under where the Beverly Center is now. And in that area, it was just like in Spanky and Our Gang comedies, The Little Rascals. It was out of the 20s or 30s. And there was a pony ride from way back, somewhere in like the 30s. There was a little key shop, little key stand. And there were these tanks and oil wells. And you couldn't see them from the street because they had this donut of earth around in case the tanks blew out. So you'd climb up over these things and down into a brand new world. And that was one of the greatest finds. And right next to where this happened, there was a narrow tank coming up out of the ground. And it was surrounded by a donut of water. But just down at the bottom of the water, there was tar. Who knows how thick it was. And tar preserves things. And the cat has served many purposes. But I lowered this cat in there, and then about a year later came back and pulled the wire, and the cat came out, impregnated with tar. And I laid the cat down on the ground and came back another year later, and it was a perfect marriage of cat and earth. Tar impregnated cat in earth. And I have a photograph of that. But the cat did end up in a scene, but it was unrecognizable. There was a scene where Henry catches his foot on a wire that was connected to this cat, as if some sort of strange thing had been going on. And, but that never made it into the film, but I have a little piece of that, film left.
And I remember having to call CFI and get in my car and drive as fast as my car would go to get there by midnight.
Right.
And give it to Mars. Remember Mars?
Mars Baumgarten.
Oh, he was a great guy. He really helped us a lot.
He sure did.
But then I think one of the reasons why also it's so indelibly printed is that so often we would then do it again.
Exactly.
So we had a chance to really, get into it.
And somewhere along in there, George Stevens Jr. made a deal with Sid Solo, who was running CFI, that we could get all our film developed free and then printed at a very, good reduced rate. And that really saved us. So there's the guy named, there was George Hutcherson, who just recently left CFI, and Mars Baumgarten was the night man. And we'd see Mars all the time. And that went on. They saw us, for many, many years, bringing in, the film. We'd screen our dailies up at the main house, and Ron Barth was our projectionist. He was night watchman for a while. And Ron is one of the several people who claim to have seen the ghost of Doheny. As a night watchman, he sometimes took a little nap on a couch in the main entrance hall. And something woke him up, and he looked up, and on the stairs was Doheny in his bathrobe, and then just gently, disappeared. Jack Nance saw Doheny. One night we were shooting on the stage for The Lady in the Radiator, and it came time for me to deliver my papers. And during the time I was gone, Jack wandered back down into the basement of the main house, because we shot that up in the laundry area. In a mansion like that, people like the smell of clothes that have been dried in the air and the sun. So there was a pit off the laundry room. And this pit, you couldn't see from, it wouldn't ruin the look of the mansion. It was a concrete pit with maybe 20-foot walls. And they had all these lines in it where they'd hang out the laundry. And it would dry with no one seeing laundry on a line. And in that pit, I built a set for, the Lady in the Radiator. And through the laundry room, you could enter the basement corridors. And then they kind of slanted down to a deeper, basement. And Jack went down there that night and took a nap. And he was awakened and saw Doheny. The Lady in the Radiator was never in the original script. And one night I was sitting in the food room, and I started drawing on a 3x5 card. And I drew the Lady in the Radiator. And I'd been thinking about some things, and it sort of came to me, right then, that she was going to be in the film, and that she was connected with the radiator. I don't know how it happened, but that whole thing, she lived in there, where it was warm. And I thought, I better check on that radiator to see if it's possible that somebody could be in there. And I went running in, because I couldn't picture it in my mind, to the set, already months established, and looked at that radiator, and it's unlike any radiator. It has a place in the middle that, just was a perfect entrance to where she was. And how many radiators have that? And it went like that until 1976, when I was asked to leave the stables when George Stevens Jr. kind of thought they would make a great place for him to have an editing room. And so I had to get out. And I was practically finished, but we rallied and finished up everything in time and left. I think it was 75. And it might have been 75. Catherine.
What?
How many years did you work on Eraserhead?
I think about 4.
No, you worked 6 years.
6?
Yeah. Well, maybe
That was a
5.
long time of my life.
Maybe 5 years.
Yeah, I remember being really young when I started, and I'm just looking at these pictures of all of us. You know, we kind of, when we finished it, we were all looked a little bit older. It became kind of like the more challenges. I mean, it was from filling the drawer of pudding to, dyeing the sheets with tea so that they weren't too white. All those things just became what we normally did in the course of a day. So when I went on to work on other movies, everything which was so compartmentalized always seemed not quite the real thing.
Exactly.
Eraserhead really felt like the real thing. And you were always in charge. You always knew exactly what you wanted, but you had each of us feeling like we were really part of it, which I think we were. But it was really helping you with this vision.
Then, in '76, sometime, maybe, I can't remember when, sometime in there, we finished Eraserhead. A sense of place is critical to a film. And sound, particularly, can expand, what you're seeing and expand the world. And those things can break a mood or enhance a mood. And naturally, you want to make a world, and it's a particular world in every film. But this one is a particular, feel. I was editing all along. So it was always kind of right up to where we were, and I just plug in the pieces. But then it was quite long at one point, and I had a stand-up old bubble moviola, and it was a beauty. It was very kind of film. And I loved that machine, and then I moved that moviola to the bungalow and had it set up in a garage. And Al and I, could work together in there. Then when we came time to mix, it was all mono, 8 dubbers, and mag mix. And some people came to AFI, and they were part of Cannes Film Festival. And they wanted to see Eraserhead to see if it was going to go to Cannes. So Al and I had a talk that we would try to work and make the Cannes Film Festival with Eraserhead. And Al said, I'll do it. I'll go, 24 hours. But if you will not take your Bob's break in the afternoon, which almost killed me. But I said, okay, Al, I'll do that. But it's killing me. So every afternoon at 2:30, I'd get in this thing and want to go out. We just kept working. And eventually, Al said, okay, look, we won't go all the way to Bob's, but we'll go up to the Hamburger Hamlet and have a coffee. And so that's what we did. We went up there, and then I discovered this Dutch apple pie. And then I got the bill for, the piece of Dutch apple pie. And I had to stop, doing that. And then I was in a grocery store, and I saw a Dutch apple pie, almost exactly the same price for a whole pie as it was for one slice at Hamburger Hamlet. So I bought this pie, and you just put it in the oven, and then you put it in the refrigerator, and I would take a slice of pie and wrap it in a wax paper and put it under my jacket. And then I'd eat that in the hamburger hamlet and surreptitiously. And that was a real thrill. We didn't have any money for sound stock. So somehow we heard there were bins of sound stock that the sound editors from Warner Brothers would throw away. Big trash bins filled with it. And so there was somebody connected to AFI that was working over there. We got on the lot. And then we found these bins. And in preparation, I'd removed the back seat of the Volkswagen. And we filled every square inch of that Volkswagen full of almost total clean reels. And then Al had a degausser. So we degaused everything when we got back. And all the stock for Eraserhead came from the throwaway bins at Warner Brothers. We finished, Al and I, the mix was done, but the film was not married, sound and picture. So there were 12 reels of sound and 12 reels of picture. And this had to go right now to New York City because they were screening films for Cannes. So I took the last money in the bank and got an airline ticket, a red eye, to New York. And I got there, like really early in the morning, and found out that there were 4 or 5 films ahead of me that they got to look at before they look at Eraserhead. So I'm eating this donuts and having coffee and sitting on the curb out there, and kept going in. And the guy says 2 more films and like that till they started running Eraserhead. And so finally it was over, packed it up, came back, and never heard anything. And so I made a phone call, and it turns out that the people who I thought were looking at the film in that room had left New York for Paris 2 days earlier. And the guy was showing films to an empty house. So Eraserhead never went to Cannes. I invited friends, and we had a kind of a formal screening of Eraserhead when it was finally finished. And my parents came to the first screening of Eraserhead. And afterwards, someone sitting next to my mother told me, she said, when the lights came up, "Oh, I wouldn't want to have a dream like that." The film showed at Filmex 77. That was the official first screening of Eraserhead. And I was too afraid to go in with the people, so I paced outside. And it seemed like the film was 400 hours long. And I was dying. And there was a little button behind the last row of seats in this giant theater. And you just push this button and it bumps the sound, 2 dB. And I had pushed it a bunch of times, but I pushed it too many times. So not only was the film very, very long, but I think it was killing people in the front rows. And so Fred drove me home that night, and I told him, I said, I'm cutting the film tonight, and I'm going to cut this scene, this scene, this scene. And Fred was, completely against it and told me I was crazy. Are you sure? I said, I am positive. And I went in and I cut the composite, print. And that's something you really, shouldn't do. And then I had to go over to CFI because I didn't know how to stitch this thing together after I did it to make that work. And I had this editor over there, and he became very confused because I had to bring him up to speed and all this stuff and bring him, a bunch of elements. Finally, it got straightened out, and a new picture and soundtrack were made. 20 minutes shorter. the way it is now, the way it was supposed to be. You know, I just needed to suffer that screening. I wish I had those scenes because I loved them as little scenes, but they didn't belong in the film. I could have done a lot better job taking care of things. Um, Sometimes everyone has the experience when they need to move to another place. They find they can't take as much stuff with them as they would like. And so later on, they look back and they wish they had taken a couple more things. So I've lost a lot of things from Eraserhead that I wished I'd kept. Well, in those days, no one thought too much of Eraserhead. It was midnight films that put it on the map. And that was Ben Barenholtz, known as the grandfather of the midnight film. If it wasn't for Ben getting Eraserhead, picking it up and distributing it, nothing would have happened to it. Zero. And it opened at the Cinema Village in the fall of 1977. And there were 26 people in the theater the first night. That was a Friday night. Then Saturday night, there was 24. And Ben said, I'm not going to spend any money, and I'm not going to, do any kind of, big promotion. And he said, in 2 months, there's going to be lines around the block. And that's exactly what happened. It played in 17 cities for as long as 4 years on the midnight circuit. And that usually meant one night a week, Friday or Saturday at midnight. I'm going down Sunset Boulevard, and I see 5 Woody Woodpecker dolls with hooks in their back, and I feel the pain of them. They're hanging in the service station. I swing a U-turn, slam on the brakes, pull into this place, and I said, I want those guys off those hooks. I'm buying all of them right now. And the guy helps me get them down. I sit them all in the back seat, and those were my boys, and I kept them for many years. Sometime in the New Art Theater, where it was running Eraserhead every Friday night, said they would like me to maybe think about doing a new trailer, some kind of thing to, kind of goose Eraserhead attendance. So I had Fred and Catherine shoot me giving a talk on Fred's couch with the Woodpeckers, and that ran at the New Art along with the official Eraserhead trailer.
I haven't seen the movie in a really long time, but I do remember that night that you showed it to the cast and crew of Dune. I think I might have brought the print down with me when I came down to visit.
Uh-huh.
So then you screened it for the crew, and we watched it. We stood in the back and watched it, Jack and you and me and Fred and I think Jenny, and we were all watching it for the first time in quite a while, and nobody was saying, they weren't responding a whole lot, and then it was over, and we were like really kind of feeling good about the work, and it was like you were really looking forward to hearing what people had to say, and they walked out, and they all just walked by you and said, gracias, senor. It was very funny. They just didn't know quite what to say.
It is a personal film, and no reviewer or critic or viewer has ever given an interpretation that is my interpretation. Since the, 25 years or more that it's been out.